Well, hello, I'm Ian Hines, the CEO of Intersol Global. I'd like, if I could, to introduce Nick Hawkins. Nick's the technical knowledge behind the online training module for those who are likely to sit as discipline panel members in higher education. Hi, Nick, and thanks for your support with this training. Nick's a barrister of Normanton Chambers and has a wealth of experience in leadership, governance, discipline hearings, legal services, and supports us here at Intersol with this crucial piece of the investigation case management process, the panel hearing. Now, just before continuing, I'd ask you with a sort of slight wry smile to bear in mind that we recorded this during lockdown, which is probably patently obvious. So please bear with us in terms of the recording quality. And without further ado, Nick, could I perhaps turn to you and ask you to explain to the delegates that are watching and about to embark on this training why it's so important that those who are going to sit on discipline panels are trained for that role?
Well, firstly, discipline panel members will be members of universities who are taken out of their comfortable environment that they're very skilled at and put in an unfamiliar environment. That in itself is daunting, but they're then asked to make decisions that have serious impacts on those involved, and those decisions can have lifelong impacts on those involved. So it's a very onerous responsibility. That in itself would make training worthwhile, but it's complicated by the fact that we've got over 100 higher education providers in England and Wales, each with their own set of rules and procedures. So even if you've been a panel member in one university in your past career, it doesn't follow that it's going to be exactly the same in another university, which is why we think this training's hopefully going to be so helpful to people.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Now, you referred there briefly to the many different and often conflicting higher education disciplinary frameworks, and you're going to want to refer to this in the training and reinforce some of the views about that later on. But can I ask you just to give some insight into what sort of challenges that you think professionally that they can present for panels?
Well, I think there are two, Ian, and they're both to do with inconsistencies. The first is that each university jealously guards its independence, and understandably so, and each university has the right to have its own statutes, rules, regulations. But the fact that there's over 100 providers, each with their own rules, means it's very difficult for one national body to say, this is the way student misconduct is investigated, and this is the way student misconduct is dealt with in a hearing across England and Wales or the UK as a whole. So that creates problems because there is no model rules of procedure or guide for panel members. And the second problem will be internal to each of those universities, because each university will not only have their statutes, but they'll have rules, regulations, policies and procedures. And so a statute may ban misconduct, a policy may say how it's dealt with, rules may define misconduct, and there's a danger that they all contradict each other or slightly conflict. So panel members need to know what they're being asked to find, and that in itself can be quite a challenge before they even start.
Thanks, Nick. That's really helpful, and I know you will talk further to that topic later on. Just, I suppose, turning to some specifics, really, and you mentioned how important the role of the panel is. Can I ask you just to give a view on the role of the person chairing the panel? What is their role?
Well, their role is to ensure that the panel is run correctly. They are in charge of the panel, and they have to ensure that the rules are followed, the rules of procedure are followed. They have to ensure it's conducted professionally. They have to ensure that it's conducted empathetically and that witnesses are treated with respect and courtesy. So that in itself is quite a challenge. They then have the second challenge of chairing the private discussions between panel members when they retire to consider whether the facts alleged are proved, and then potentially later retiring to consider what sanction is appropriate. And finally, of course, they have the responsibility of announcing the decisions and reasons for it. So the role of the chair is pivotal and particularly demanding.
Very helpful. You sort of made a passing reference there to about whether the discipline allegation was proved or disproved. That actually raises an important and interesting point for me that recurs time and time again when we've been working training staff to conduct investigations, but more recently, actually conducting them in support of on behalf of the universities as external investigators. And that's this issue about the standard of proof in discipline investigations, Nick. And I just wondered if you had a view, which does recur in conversations we have, that the balance of probabilities, of course, which is that standard, should that differ in its application depending upon the status of the person who is being reported and effectively under investigation? What's your thoughts on that, Nick?
Simple answer, Ian, absolutely not. There are two standards of proof known in English law. One's the criminal standard, which doesn't apply in misconduct hearings, and the other is the civil standard, as you've described, the balance of probabilities. Mm-hmm. And that's the same, whatever the allegation is, no matter how serious or less serious, and no matter what the status of the person facing the hearing. So there should be no difference between somebody in their first term at university and a highly respected postdoctoral research student. We're all equal before the law. There is no sliding scale of proof. It's the balance of probabilities for all of us.
Thanks, Nick. Makes it a lot clearer. And again, it'll be something that's discussed in more detail. But I'm sure it'll be really helpful to those who sit on the panels. I wonder, could I ask you now just to explain to the listener, the delegates who are going on this training, why reliable investigation findings are so important when they feed into the panel members? What's any thoughts on that, Nick?
Yes, Ian. Well, the panel have to decide the allegations on the evidence presented in front of them. They can't fill in the gaps for themselves. They can't go researching on the internet or anything like that. Mm-hmm. They're presented with evidence and they have to reach a conclusion based on that evidence. That evidence normally comes about because there's an allegation made and an investigator is appointed to conduct a fact-finding investigation to look for evidence. And they should be looking for evidence that both supports the allegation, but equally that disproves the allegation. And the investigator should end up presenting a balanced report, which may, or indeed may not, lead to a discipline hearing. So it follows that a good investigation will uncover all or almost all of the available evidence, and the panel will be able to make a balanced and fair decision based on that evidence. But of course, it also follows that if the investigator only covers part of the evidence or only looks for evidence that supports one side or the other, the panel will only have part of the story. And whilst they might make the right decision based on what's in front of them, that decision may actually prove to be the wrong decision, prove to be unjust, and somebody that should face disciplinary proceedings may walk away from them, or somebody that shouldn't be facing disciplinary hearings finds themselves sanctioned when there's evidence that would actually exonerate them. Yeah. So it's not overstating it to say the panel's only as good as the evidence in front of them, and that evidence comes from an investigation.
Thanks, Nick. That's very clear. Okay, pretty much there, really. But I just wonder, perhaps, I think there's one last question from me, Nick, and that is before delegates embark on the training, I wonder, could you highlight perhaps a couple of key learning points that the delegates can expect to take away from this module?
Yeah, I hope delegates will take two things away from this module, Ian. The first is I hope they will take away sufficient technical knowledge to understand the context in which they're going to be operating and what's expected of them as panel members and how they might approach their role as panel members. So that's the technical knowledge side of it. The second is I hope they will get some confidence from the module, or from all of the modules, that they can actually do this difficult job and that they can do it competently. So it's some knowledge and some confidence. On top of that, it would be nice to think that delegates would find it interesting. It would be even better if they found it enjoyable. And what I hope they will all want to do at the end of this course is sign up for a practical day's training, which we hope to be able to deliver when lockdown restrictions are lifted, where they'll get the chance to practice some of their skills and apply some of the knowledge in a very safe environment before they actually have to go into a real life panel hearing.
That's helpful. Well, if Nick, I'm going to actually revisit that at the end of these modules of learning. I'm going to revisit that and just try and explain to the delegates why that day's face-to-face training is so crucial in terms of from an education point of view, reinforcing the technical learning that you're going to hopefully give them in the few hours it will take to complete this module. That's it, Nick. Thanks very much. Can I just thank you for your time, taking the time to answer the questions, Nick, and also formally for your valuable support in putting this module together. We've been asked time and time again by universities, can we do something to support and help the panel members? Indeed, I've spoken to panel members on several occasions, and hopefully this is something that we can respond to them when they've asked us for this sort of training. So, turning to you, the delegates, on behalf of all of us here at Intersol Global, Nick and the team at the Hawkins Consultancy, please enjoy the training. That's the most important thing. We hope you'll find the training and some of the resources that we've embedded within it useful for you, and wish you all the very best in your future position and role as a disciplined panel member. I'll come back, talk to you some more just for 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the training about what might happen next. But in the meantime, thanks very much and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.